The scream cut through the Arizona night like a blade, sharp and desperate, reaching Graham Quincy where he sat by his own modest fire, 300 yards away across the canyon floor. He was on his feet before conscious thought took over, his hand already reaching for the rifle leaning against his saddle while his other hand knocked dirt over the flames. The moon hung fat and silver above the rocky landscape, casting enough light to see by once his eyes adjusted, and in that pale glow he could make out the flicker of another campfire and the shadows of men moving with purpose that set his jaw tight. Graham had been riding alone for 6 days, making his way from Jerome Junction back to his family's ranch near Prescott, and he had grown accustomed to the solitude. At 26 years old, he had seen enough of frontier life to know when something was wrong, and every instinct he possessed was screaming at him now. He swung up into the saddle without bothering to pack his gear, urging his bay gelding forward at a run across the desert floor. The horse's hooves pounded against the packed earth as they closed the distance, and Graham could hear voices now, rough male laughter mixed with protests from someone whose fear was evident even from this distance. "Please, I told you I have nothing of value," a woman's voice rang out, trying for firmness but trembling at the edges. "Just leave me be and ride on." "Now that ain't very neighborly," one of the men responded, his words slurred with drink. "We just want to be friendly, share your fire for a spell." "I said no, get away from my camp." Graham counted 4 silhouettes as he approached, all of them closing in on a smaller figure that backed toward the fire. He could see her more clearly now in the firelight, a young woman with dark hair pulled back, dressed in traveling clothes and holding a cooking pan like a weapon. She looked terrified but defiant, and something in Graham's chest tightened at the sight. He fired his rifle into the air, the crack of the shot echoing off the canyon walls and freezing everyone in place. His horse thundered into the camp, and Graham reined up hard, the animal dancing sideways as he leveled the rifle at the 4 men. "The lady asked you to leave," Graham said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that came from years of handling stubborn cattle in dangerous situations. "I suggest you honor that request." The 4 men turned as one, and Graham sized them up quickly. Drifters, most likely, the kind of men who made their living taking from others. They wore mismatched clothes and had the lean, mean look of wolves who had gone too long between meals. The biggest one, a man with a scar running down his cheek, took a step forward. "This ain't your concern, friend," Scarface said. "Ride on." "Cannot do that," Graham replied, keeping his rifle steady. "Now you boys have 2 choices. You can mount up and ride out peaceable, or we can settle this another way. I'm fine with either option, but I will tell you plain that only one ends well for you." The woman had moved now, circling to put the fire between herself and the men, and Graham caught a glimpse of her face. Even in the uncertain light, he could see she was beautiful, with high cheekbones and eyes that sparked with intelligence and fear in equal measure. She looked young, maybe 22 or 23, and she was alone out here in this wilderness. Questions flooded his mind, but he pushed them aside to focus on the immediate threat. One of the other men, a skinny fellow with a patchy beard, started to reach for his gun. Graham swung the rifle barrel toward him. "Do not," Graham said simply. The tension stretched taut as a bowstring for 3 heartbeats. Then Scarface spat into the dirt and gestured to his companions. "Come on, boys. Ain't worth getting shot over. Plenty of other camps out there." He pointed at Graham. "You watch yourself, friend. We might meet again." "If we do, I will remember your faces," Graham said, "and I will spread word of what you tried here tonight. The law in Jerome Junction knows me well." The mention of the law and a nearby town seemed to decide matters. The 4 men backed toward their horses, mounted up with poor grace, and rode off into the darkness. Graham kept his rifle ready until the sound of their hoofbeats faded completely. Then he finally lowered the weapon and turned his attention to the woman. She stood on the far side of the fire, still gripping that cooking pan, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Now that the immediate danger had passed, Graham could see she was shaking. "They have gone," he said gently, staying in his saddle so as not to crowd her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, then seemed to find her voice. "No, you arrived before they could do more than threaten." She lowered the pan slowly. "Thank you. I do not know what would have happened if you had not heard." "Best not to think on it," Graham said. He swung down from his horse, moving slowly and keeping his hands visible. "My name is Graham Quincy. My family has a ranch about 30 miles north of here. I've been in Jerome Junction on business and was heading home." "Hannah Foster," she said, and some of the tension eased from her shoulders. I'm traveling from Tucson to meet my brother in Prescott. He has a position there at the territorial office, and he sent for me after our father passed." Her voice caught slightly on the last words. Graham felt that tug in his chest again. "I am sorry for your loss," he said, meaning it. "But Miss Foster, forgive me for saying so, you should not be traveling this route alone. It is dangerous country, and those men are not the only threats out here." Her chin came up, and he saw a flash of pride in her eyes. "I could not afford to hire an escort, and my brother could not leave his position to come fetch me. I had little choice in the matter." "I understand," Graham said, though he thought there were probably better options she could have taken. Still, she had shown courage in a hard situation, and he respected that. "Listen, I cannot in good conscience leave you out here alone, not after what just happened. Those men might circle back once they think I have moved on. Let me stay the night nearby. Keep watch. In the morning, I will ride with you toward Prescott. My ranch is on the way, and from there it is only another 15 miles to town. My mother can put you up for a night if need be. Let you rest before you complete your journey." Hannah hesitated, clearly weighing the propriety of accepting help from a stranger against the very real danger of refusing it. Graham waited patiently, keeping his distance and his posture unthreatening. "That is very kind of you, Mr. Quincy," she said finally. "I would be grateful for the company on the road. Tonight, though, please feel free to share the fire. I have coffee, and it seems foolish for us to maintain separate camps when we are both aware of the dangers." Graham nodded his agreement and went to retrieve his gear from where he had left it. By the time he returned, leading his horse, Hannah had composed herself and was setting the coffee pot over the fire. She had a neat little camp, he noticed, everything arranged with care. A small tent was pitched a few feet back from the fire, and her supplies were stacked and covered with canvas. She traveled light but smart. They sat on opposite sides of the fire, the flames crackling between them as the coffee heated. Graham found himself studying her when she was not looking. Hannah Foster had the kind of beauty that struck you unexpected, not showy or obvious, but there in the clean lines of her face and the grace of her movements. Her hair had come partly loose from its pins during the confrontation, and dark strands framed her face. She had changed from fear to composed in the space of minutes, and he admired that resilience. "How long were you planning to travel alone?" he asked, accepting a cup of coffee when she poured it. Another 4 days, I thought," Hannah said, wrapping her hands around her own cup. "I have been on the trail for 6 already. I left Tucson with a family who were heading to Phoenix, and from there, I hired a wagon to take me as far as Black Canyon City. I thought the rest would be manageable on my own," she smiled ruefully. "That seems naive now." "Not naive," Graham said. "Optimistic, maybe. But you could not have known those men would be out here." He sipped the coffee, which was strong and good. "What does your brother do in Prescott?" "He works as a clerk in the land office," Hannah said. "It is not glamorous work, but it is steady, and he has a small house. After father died, there was little left. The shop went to pay his debts, and I had no means to support myself in Tucson. James wrote and offered me a place with him until I could find a teaching position or other suitable work." There was no self-pity in her voice, just a straightforward recounting of facts, and Graham respected that too. The frontier was full of people starting over, making do, surviving however they could. Hannah Foster was doing what needed to be done, same as anyone. "You're a teacher?" he asked. "I trained to be one, yes," she said. "I taught at a small school in Tucson for 2 years before father fell ill. I cared for him the last 8 months, and in that time the school hired someone else. I am hopeful there will be an opening in Prescott or one of the surrounding communities." They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easier than Graham would have expected given the circumstances of their meeting. Hannah asked about his ranch, and he told her about the cattle operation his father had built over 20 years, how they had weathered drought and Apache raids and the constant struggle of frontier life. She listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions that showed she understood the challenges, even if she had no direct experience with ranching. When the fire burned low and the night grew late, Graham excused himself and set up his bedroll a respectful distance from her tent. He lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the desert night and thinking about the woman sleeping 30 feet away. She had gotten under his skin somehow in the space of a few hours, and he was not entirely sure what to make of that feeling. Morning came with the pale blue light of dawn spreading across the Arizona landscape. Graham woke to find Hannah already up and tending the fire, heating water for coffee and what looked like cornmeal for breakfast. She had braided her hair neatly and wore a clean traveling dress in a practical brown color. When she saw he was awake, she smiled, and Graham felt something warm unfurl in his chest at that simple expression. "Good morning, Mr. Quincy," she said. "I hope you slept well." "Well enough," he said, rising and rolling his bedding efficiently. "And please call me Graham. Mr. seems too formal after last night." "Then you must call me Hannah," she replied, handing him a cup of coffee when he approached the fire. They ate a simple breakfast, then broke camp together. Graham was impressed by how quickly and efficiently Hannah worked, everything packed and secured with the ease of practice. Her horse, a sturdy gray mare, was already saddled and waiting. Within 30 minutes they were mounted and riding north across the desert. The landscape around them was stark and beautiful in the morning light, all red rock and scrubby vegetation, with mountains rising purple in the distance. Graham set a steady pace, not too fast, but not dawdling either. He kept his eyes scanning the horizon out of habit, watching for trouble or signs of water. Hannah rode well, sitting her horse with confidence, and he did not have to slow down for her sake. As they rode, they talked more, the conversation picking up where it had left off the night before. Graham found himself telling her things he rarely shared, about his worries for the ranch, about his younger sister Sarah who wanted to go east to school, about his father's declining health. Hannah listened with a sympathy that felt genuine, and she shared her own concerns about starting over in a new place, about being a burden to her brother, about whether she would find her place in Prescott. "You will," Graham said with certainty. "Any school would be lucky to have you as a teacher. That much is clear." She glanced at him, surprise and pleasure mingling in her expression. "You barely know me, Graham. How can you say that?" "I know enough," he said. "I know you had the courage to travel alone through dangerous country because it was necessary. I know you were prepared to defend yourself with a cooking pan against 4 grown men. I know you keep a neat camp and make good coffee, and you have not complained once about this situation, even though you have every right to. Those things tell me what I need to know about your character." Hannah was quiet for a moment, and when Graham looked over, he thought he saw color in her cheeks. "That is kind of you to say," she said softly. "I confess I was terrified last night. I've never been so frightened in my life." "Fear and courage are not opposites," Graham said. "Being brave means acting right even when you are scared. You did that." They rode on in comfortable silence for a while after that, and Graham felt the connection between them deepening with each passing hour. He had known plenty of women in his 26 years, had even courted a girl from Jerome Junction for a few months before they both realized there was no spark between them, but he had never felt anything quite like this. Hannah Foster intrigued him in a way he could not fully articulate, drawing his attention and his admiration in equal measure. They stopped at midday near a creek that cut through the landscape, one of the reliable water sources Graham knew from his travels through this country. The horses drank deeply while Graham and Hannah rested in the shade of a cottonwood tree, eating jerky and hardtack from their supplies. "How much farther to your ranch?" Hannah asked, wiping dust from her face with a handkerchief. "We should arrive by late afternoon if we maintain this pace," Graham said. "My parents will be pleased to meet you. My mother especially loves having visitors. We do not get many out at the ranch." "I do not want to impose," Hannah said quickly. "If you just point me toward Prescott, I can manage from there." "Nonsense," Graham said. "You are not imposing. Besides, it is not safe to ride alone, not after what happened. Those men might still be in the area, or others like them. Please, let me see you all the way to your brother's house. I will rest easier knowing you arrived safe." Hannah studied him for a long moment, and Graham met her gaze steadily. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded. "All right," she said. "Thank you, Graham. I admit I will feel safer with your company." They remounted and continued north, the land changing gradually as they climbed in elevation. The desert gave way to high grassland, and the air grew slightly cooler. Graham pointed out landmarks as they rode, telling her the names of mountains and describing the history of the area as he knew it. Hannah listened attentively, asking questions and showing genuine interest in everything he shared. It was late afternoon when they crested a rise, and Graham saw the familiar sight of his family's ranch spread out in the valley below. The main house was a solid adobe structure with a wooden porch built to withstand the harsh climate. A barn and several outbuildings stood nearby, and corrals held cattle and horses. Smoke rose from the chimney, meaning his mother was cooking, and Graham felt the warm pull of home. "There it is," he said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "The Quincy Ranch. My father started with 200 acres and 50 head of cattle 23 years ago. Now we've got 3,000 acres and run about 500 head, depending on the season." "It is beautiful," Hannah said, and she sounded like she meant it. "I can see why you would be proud." They rode down into the valley, and Graham saw his father emerge from the barn, shading his eyes against the afternoon sun. Robert Quincy was a big man, weathered by years under the Arizona sun, and when he recognized Graham, his stern face broke into a smile. "Graham," he called, "we were not expecting you until tomorrow." His gaze shifted to Hannah, and curiosity replaced the surprise in his expression. Graham swung down from his horse and clasped his father's hand. "I made good time from Jerome Junction," he said. "Pa, this is Miss Hannah Foster. I encountered her on the trail last night, and she could use our hospitality if you and Ma are willing." Robert Quincy was already removing his hat, his manners too ingrained to do otherwise. "Any friend of Graham's is welcome here, Miss Foster," he said warmly. "Please come inside. My wife will be delighted to have company." They left the horses with one of the ranch hands and went into the house, where Graham's mother was indeed in the kitchen preparing supper. Martha Quincy was a small woman with gray-streaked brown hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at Hannah and then at Graham, and he could practically see her mind working. Ma, this is Miss Hannah Foster," Graham said. "She is traveling to Prescott to join her brother, and I offered her a night's rest here before completing the journey. Miss Foster, my mother, Martha Quincy." "How lovely to meet you, dear," Martha said, coming forward to take Hannah's hands. "You look exhausted. Come, sit down. I will get you some water, and you must tell me everything." Hannah found herself swept up in Martha Quincy's capable care, installed in a comfortable chair with cold water and warm bread, and before Graham quite knew what was happening, his mother had extracted the entire story of the previous night's encounter. Martha's expression grew increasingly concerned as Hannah described the four men, and when Graham added his own details, his mother reached out to squeeze his arm. "Thank God you heard her, Graham," Martha said fervently. "Lord knows what those men intended." She turned to Hannah. "You poor child. Well, you are safe now, and you will stay here as long as you need. I will not hear of you traveling on until you are properly rested." Graham caught Hannah's eye across the room and saw gratitude and relief in her expression. His sister Sarah came home then, a lively girl of 17 with their mother's eyes and their father's height. She was immediately fascinated by Hannah, peppering her with questions about Tucson and teaching and what fashions were like in the larger towns. Hannah answered with patience and good humor, and Graham watched the way she engaged with his sister, encouraging without condescending. That evening at supper, Graham sat across from Hannah and observed the way she fit into his family's dynamic as if she had always been there. She helped his mother serve the food without being asked, complimented his father's ranch management when Robert described their plans for the next year, and listened to Sarah's chatter about wanting to study literature in San Francisco with the same interest she had shown for Graham's stories of the trail. His parents exchanged meaningful glances more than once, and Graham knew they were thinking what he was thinking, that Hannah Foster was something special. After supper, Sarah insisted on showing Hannah the garden, and Graham found himself alone with his parents in the parlor. His mother wasted no time. "She is lovely, Graham," Martha said, "and clearly a woman of character. How long have you known her?" "About 24 hours, Ma," Graham said, fighting a smile. "Do not start planning a wedding." "I'm not planning anything," Martha said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I'm simply observing that you have not stopped looking at her since you arrived, and she watches you the same way when she thinks no one notices." "Your mother is right," Robert said, tamping tobacco into his pipe. "You were taken with her. That much is obvious." Graham did not bother denying it. "I am," he admitted, "but she is on her way to Prescott to start a new life. I have no right to complicate that." "Or you could be part of that new life," Martha said gently. "Talk to her, Graham. See where her heart lies." Before Graham could respond, Hannah and Sarah returned from the garden, and the moment passed. The rest of the evening was spent in pleasant conversation, and when Martha showed Hannah to the small guest room, Graham found himself both disappointed and relieved. He needed time to think, to sort through the unfamiliar feelings crowding his chest. He lay awake that night in his old room, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Hannah in the room down the hall. 24 hours ago, he had not known she existed, and now he could not imagine riding away from her tomorrow and never seeing her again. The thought made something ache in his chest, a yearning he had never experienced before. Morning came too quickly. Graham woke to find his mother already in the kitchen, and she fixed him with a knowing look when he came in for coffee. "You're taking her to Prescott today?" Martha asked. "That was the plan," Graham said. "And then what? You ride home and forget about her?" "Ma," Graham said, but there was no heat in it. Martha came to stand in front of him, her small hands gripping his arms. "Graham Quincy, you listen to me. That girl is special. Anyone can see it. And unless I miss my guess, she cares for you too. Do not let her slip away because you are too cautious or too proud to take a chance." "She barely knows me," Graham protested, "and I barely know her." "You know enough," Martha said, echoing his own words from the trail. "Trust your heart, son." Before Graham could reply, he heard footsteps and turned to find Hannah in the doorway. She wore a fresh dress, her hair neatly arranged, and she looked rested and beautiful in the morning light. "Good morning," she said, her eyes going to Graham. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, dear," Martha said smoothly. "I was just telling Graham that there is no rush for you to leave. You are welcome to stay another day, rest properly." Hannah's gaze did not leave Graham's face. "That's very kind, but I have imposed on your hospitality enough. My brother is expecting me, and I should not delay any longer." Something in her tone made Graham wonder if she was as eager to reach Prescott as her words suggested, or if she was simply being polite. He thought about what his mother had said, about taking chances and trusting his heart. "Let me saddle the horses," he said. "We can be in Prescott by afternoon." They departed an hour later after a breakfast that Martha insisted on preparing. Sarah hugged Hannah goodbye and made her promise to write, and Robert gave Graham a speaking look that needed no translation. The ride to Prescott was quieter than the previous day's journey, both of them seemingly lost in thought. The town appeared in the distance around midday, a collection of wooden buildings and dusty streets nestled in the hills. Graham had been there many times, knew the layout well, and when Hannah gave him the address of her brother's house, he guided them through town to a modest home on a quiet street. A man emerged as they approached, tall and thin with sandy hair and Hannah's eyes. This had to be James Foster. He hurried down the steps, relief and worry mingling on his face. "Hannah," he said, helping her down from her horse. "Thank God you are here safely. Your last letter said you would arrive 3 days ago, and I have been beside myself with worry." "I am sorry, James," Hannah said, embracing her brother. "The journey took longer than expected, and I encountered some trouble on the trail." She turned to include Graham. "This is Graham Quincy. He came to my aid and ensured I reached you safely." James Foster shook Graham's hand with evident gratitude. "I'm in your debt, Mr. Quincy. Please come inside. Let me offer you a meal at least, some hospitality after you have shown such kindness to my sister." Graham wanted to refuse, to make a clean break before this got any harder, but he found himself accepting. James's house was small but tidy, clearly the home of a bachelor doing his best. Over coffee, Hannah told her brother about the encounter with the 4 men, though she minimized the danger in a way that made Graham suspect she was trying to spare James additional worry. James listened with growing alarm, his face pale by the time she finished. "My God, Hannah," he said, "if Mr. Quincy had not been there, you might have been killed or worse." "But he was there," Hannah said firmly, "and here I am, safe and sound. Let us not dwell on what might have been." Graham stayed for an hour, making small talk with James about the town and opportunities for work, but all the while he was intensely aware of Hannah's presence across the room. When he finally rose to leave, she walked him to the door while James went to see about unpacking her belongings. They stood on the small porch, and suddenly Graham did not know what to say. All the words that had come so easily on the trail seemed to have deserted him. "Thank you, Graham," Hannah said softly, "for everything. You saved my life, and I will never forget that." "Anyone would have done the same," Graham said, though they both knew that was not true. "No," Hannah said. Not anyone. You risked yourself for a stranger, and then you showed me nothing but kindness and respect. You are a good man, Graham Quincy." He wanted to tell her that he did not want to leave, that the thought of riding away from her made his chest feel hollow. He wanted to ask if she felt this connection between them too, this sense that something significant had begun in that desert camp 2 nights ago. But the words stuck in his throat, tangled up with doubt and uncertainty. "If you ever need anything," he said instead, "the Quincy Ranch is 30 miles south. Anyone in Jerome Junction can give you directions. You or your brother are always welcome." "I will remember that," Hannah said, and was there disappointment in her voice, or was he imagining it? He should leave now, Graham thought. He should tip his hat, mount his horse, and ride away. Give Hannah the chance to build her new life here without complicating matters. It was the sensible thing to do. Instead, he heard himself say, "I come to Prescott often, for supplies to do business. Perhaps I could call on you sometime if that would be appropriate." Hope flared bright in Hannah's eyes. "I would like that very much," she said. "I would like that a great deal." The tension broke between them, and they both smiled, the awkwardness dissolving into something warmer. Graham felt his heart hammering in his chest as he reached out to take her hand. He held it gently, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "Then I will come," he said. "Soon, not weeks from now, but soon. Days." "I will look forward to it," Hannah said, her fingers tightening around his. He forced himself to release her hand and step back before he did something foolish like kiss her right there on her brother's porch. He tipped his hat to her, mounted his horse, and rode away, but he looked back twice before he reached the end of the street. Both times, Hannah was still standing on the porch, watching him go. The ride back to the ranch felt longer than any journey Graham had ever made. His mind was full of Hannah, replaying every conversation, every smile, every moment they had shared. He thought about the fear in her voice when those men had closed in on her camp and how brave she had been despite that fear. He thought about the way she fit so naturally into his family's home and how his mother had known immediately that Hannah was special. Most of all, he thought about the way his heart had lifted when she said she would welcome his calls. When he arrived back at the ranch, his mother took one look at his face and smiled. "You told her you would visit?" Martha asked. "I did," Graham confirmed. "Soon." "Good," Martha said. "Now come help your father. We have work to do, and mooning over that girl will not get the cattle fed." Graham threw himself into ranch work for the next 3 days, but Hannah was never far from his thoughts. On the 4th day, he announced to his parents that he needed to go to Prescott for supplies. His father raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, and his mother just smiled. "Give her my regards," Martha said, pressing a package of her special molasses cookies into his hands, "for Hannah and her brother." Graham made the ride to Prescott in record time, his heart beating faster as he entered the town. He stopped at the mercantile first, buying a few things to justify the trip, then made his way to James Foster's house. Hannah answered his knock, and the smile that spread across her face when she saw him made the entire ride worthwhile. "Graham," she said, and his name sounded like music in her voice. "I hoped you would come." "I said I would," he replied. "I brought cookies from my mother. May I come in?" Hannah invited him inside, and the afternoon passed in pleasant conversation. James joined them for a while, proving to be good company with a dry sense of humor that Graham appreciated. But mostly, Graham's attention was on Hannah. She told him she had already made inquiries at the local school and had an interview scheduled for the following week. She seemed happy but also a little uncertain, and Graham understood that feeling. She was starting over in a new place, and that was never easy. Before he left, Graham asked if he could take Hannah for a walk, and James readily agreed. They strolled through Prescott as the sun sank lower in the sky, talking easily about everything and nothing. Graham told her about the ranch work, about his sister's continued campaign to go to San Francisco, about the new foal that had been born while he was away. Hannah shared her nervousness about the upcoming interview, her worries about being a burden on her brother, her strange sense of displacement after leaving Tucson. "You are not a burden," Graham said firmly when she mentioned it for the 2nd time. "Your brother is happy to have you here. Anyone can see that." "He is kind," Hannah said. "But this house is small, and I know he has courted a woman here in town. I am in the way of his life." Then get your teaching position and find your own place, Graham said. But do not doubt that your brother wants you here. Family is everything, Hannah. We take care of our own. She looked up at him, and in the fading light, her eyes were luminous. You have a gift for saying exactly what I need to hear, she said quietly. I only speak the truth, Graham replied. They had walked to the edge of town without realizing it, and now they stood at the top of a small hill overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the air had cooled to a comfortable temperature. Graham was intensely aware of Hannah standing close beside him, close enough that their arms almost touched. Graham, she said, her voice soft. May I ask you something? Anything, he said. Why did you come back? I mean, truly. It is clear you did not need supplies badly enough to make this journey so soon. He could have deflected, could have made a joke or changed the subject. Instead, he found himself being completely honest. I came back because I could not stop thinking about you, he said. From the moment I heard you cry out in that camp, something changed for me. These past few days, trying to work, trying to go about my normal life, it all felt hollow because you were not there. I know it is too soon to feel this way. I know we have only known each other for days. But I cannot deny what is in my heart, Hannah. I care for you deeply, and I want to know you better. I want to court you properly, if you will allow it. Hannah was quiet for a long moment, and Graham's heart pounded as he waited for her response. Then she reached out and took his hand, interlacing her fingers with his. I feel the same way, she said. I tried to tell myself I was being foolish, that you were simply kind, and I was confusing gratitude with something deeper. But it is not gratitude, Graham. When you left the other day, I felt like part of me went with you. These past days, I kept hoping you would return, wondering if I had imagined the connection between us. She looked up at him, and he saw his own feelings reflected in her eyes. I would very much like for you to court me. Graham felt something settle in his chest, a rightness he had never experienced before. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a promise and a beginning. Then I will court you, he said. And I will do it right, Hannah. I will come to Prescott every week, spend time with you, let you see who I truly am. I want you to be certain of your feelings, and I want to be worthy of them. You are already worthy, she said softly. They stood there as the sun finished setting, hands clasped, the future spreading out before them full of possibility. When Graham finally walked Hannah back to her brother's house, he felt lighter than he had in years. True to his word, Graham came to Prescott every week. Sometimes he came midweek, sometimes on weekends, but he always came. He courted Hannah with an old-fashioned formality that charmed her, bringing flowers when he could find them, taking her on walks and picnics, introducing her to people in town. James approved of the courtship and made it clear that Graham was always welcome in his home. Hannah got the teaching position at the Prescott school, starting in the fall term. She was nervous her first week, but quickly found her rhythm, and Graham loved listening to her talk about her students and the challenges of managing a classroom with children ranging from 6 to 14 years old. She was a natural teacher, patient and kind, but firm when needed. As summer turned to fall and fall toward winter, Graham and Hannah's relationship deepened. They learned each other's histories, shared their hopes and fears, discovered the 1,000 small things that made each other unique. Graham learned that Hannah hummed when she was happy and fell silent when she was worried, that she loved reading poetry, but had a weakness for adventure novels, that she was terrible at cooking meat, but could bake bread better than anyone he knew. Hannah learned that Graham was more educated than he let on, that he read everything he could get his hands on, and had thoughts about politics and philosophy that he rarely shared, that he worried constantly about providing for his family and proving worthy of the ranch his father would someday leave him. They had their first real argument in October, over something Graham could not even remember later. What he did remember was how terrible he felt when Hannah's eyes filled with tears, and how they had talked it through like adults, listening to each other and finding compromise. That night, Graham knew with absolute certainty that he wanted to marry Hannah Foster. He waited another month, wanting to be sure she felt the same way, wanting to give her time to be certain of her own heart. He also needed to save money for a ring, something worthy of the woman he loved. His mother helped him there, quietly giving him a beautiful sapphire ring that had belonged to his grandmother. She would have wanted you to have it, Martha said, pressing it into his hand, for when you find the right woman, and you have found her, Graham. Anyone with eyes can see that. In December, on a cold, clear day when the Arizona sky was the color of cobalt, Graham rode to Prescott with the ring in his pocket and hope in his heart. He arrived at James Foster's house in the afternoon and asked Hannah if she would walk with him. She bundled up in her coat and scarf, and they made their way to the same hill where they had stood 6 months earlier when Graham had first declared his feelings. The valley spread out before them, brown and gold in the winter light, the mountains rising in the distance. Graham took Hannah's hands in his, and she looked up at him with those beautiful eyes full of trust and love. "Hannah," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "these past 6 months have been the happiest of my life. You have brought light and joy to my days, and I cannot imagine my future without you in it. You are brilliant and brave and kind, and I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person." He released one of her hands to pull the ring from his pocket, and Hannah's eyes went wide when she saw it. "I know your life here is just beginning," Graham continued. "I know you have your teaching and your independence, and I would never ask you to give those up. But I want to share your life, Hannah. I want to build a future with you, whatever that looks like. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife?" Tears streamed down Hannah's face, but she was smiling, that brilliant smile that made Graham's heart sing. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Graham, I will marry you. I love you so much, and there is nothing I want more than to be your wife." Graham slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her for the first time, a kiss that held all the love and promise and hope they both felt. Hannah kissed him back, her arms wrapping around his neck, and for that moment there was nothing in the world but the two of them and the love they shared. They were married in February of 1885 in a small ceremony in Prescott, with Graham's family and Hannah's brother in attendance, along with a few close friends they had made. Hannah wore a simple white dress that Martha had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers that Sarah had gathered. Graham wore his best suit and could not stop smiling the entire day. After the wedding, they moved to the Quincy ranch. James was disappointed to lose his sister's company, but happy for her happiness, and he promised to visit often. Hannah gave up her teaching position with genuine regret, but she and Graham had talked it through thoroughly. The ranch was 30 miles from town, too far for daily travel, and they both wanted to build their life together there. Perhaps later, Hannah said, when there were schools closer or when circumstances changed, she could teach again. For now, she would focus on being a wife and partner in the ranch work. Martha and Robert welcomed Hannah with open arms, and she settled into the rhythm of ranch life with the same determination she had shown in everything else. She learned to cook the hearty meals the ranch hands needed, to tend the vegetable garden, to keep the household running smoothly. She also proved to have a gift with horses, and Graham often found her in the corral working with the younger animals, gentling them with patience and soft words. Graham built Hannah a small library in the main house, shelves that he filled with books he ordered from back east and found in shops during trips to larger towns. It became her favorite room, and on quiet evenings, they would sit there together, Graham doing accounts while Hannah read, the comfortable silence between them, speaking of contentment and love. Sarah left for San Francisco in the spring, and Hannah helped her prepare, sewing dresses and giving advice about navigating a big city. The two women had become close, almost like real sisters, and they corresponded regularly after Sarah's departure. Life on the ranch was not always easy. There were droughts and harsh winters, times when money was tight and the work seemed endless. There were disagreements and frustrations, moments when Graham's worry about providing enough made him short-tempered, times when Hannah felt isolated being so far from town. But they faced every challenge together, talking through their problems, supporting each other through the hard times, and celebrating the good ones. In the fall of 1885, Hannah discovered she was expecting their first child. Graham was overjoyed and terrified in equal measure, suddenly hyper-aware of every potential danger around the ranch. Martha laughed at his overprotectiveness and told him to let Hannah live her life, that she was pregnant, not made of glass. Their son was born in May of 1886, a healthy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's eyes. They named him Thomas Robert Quincy, after both his grandfathers, and Graham held him with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by love for this tiny person. Hannah proved to be a natural mother, patient and nurturing, but not overindulgent. Graham was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with Thomas, teaching him about the ranch as soon as the boy was old enough to toddle around the yard. Robert Quincy Sr. was delighted with his grandson and could often be found giving the boy rides on his shoulders or carving little toys for him. 2 years later, their daughter was born, a tiny girl with red gold hair that came from some long-ago ancestor. They named her Margaret, and she had her mother's spirit and determination from the start. Graham discovered that having a daughter was different from having a son, that he was somehow even more protective of this little girl who wrapped him around her finger from day one. The years flowed by, marked by the seasons and the rhythms of ranch life. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the cattle and dreamed of expanding the ranch someday. Margaret was bright and curious, always asking questions, always into something. When she was 7, Hannah started teaching her to read, and Graham came home one day to find his daughter deep in a book that was probably too advanced for her age, but she was determined to understand every word. Robert Quincy Sr. passed away in the winter of 1892, and it hit the family hard. He had been a pillar of strength, the foundation on which the ranch was built, and his loss left a hole nothing could fill. But he had died peacefully in his sleep, with his family around him, and there was comfort in knowing he had seen his grandchildren growing up and the ranch thriving under Graham's management. Graham took over as head of the ranch officially, though he had been running most operations for years already. Martha continued to live in the main house, now a grandmother who doted on Thomas and Margaret and took joy in watching them grow. In 1894, a teacher in Jerome Junction fell ill and could not continue her position. The town's school board, desperate for a replacement, approached Hannah. The timing seemed right. Thomas was 8 and Margaret was 6, both old enough for school themselves. After much discussion with Graham, Hannah agreed to take the position. They arranged for the children to attend the same school, and 3 days a week, Hannah would drive the wagon to town with Thomas and Margaret, teach her classes, and return home in the evening. It was exhausting, but Hannah bloomed under the challenge, thrilled to be teaching again. Graham supported her completely, adjusting his own schedule to accommodate the new routine, and on the days Hannah taught, he made sure to be home early to help with the children and evening chores. They made it work because they were partners in every sense of the word, each one willing to sacrifice and adjust for the other's happiness. In 1896, their third child was born, another son they named William. His arrival was unexpected but welcomed with joy. Thomas and Margaret were old enough to help care for their little brother, and William grew up adored by his older siblings. The turn of the century found the Quincy family prosperous and content. The ranch had expanded, now running over 1,000 head of cattle and employing a dozen hands year-round. Thomas, at 14, was already proving himself a capable rancher, working alongside his father and learning every aspect of the operation. Margaret, 12, continued to excel in school and talked about becoming a teacher like her mother. William was a happy 4-year-old who followed his big brother everywhere. Hannah still taught 3 days a week, balancing her classroom with her responsibilities at home. She was beloved by her students and respected by the community. Graham watched her with pride, marveling that this accomplished, confident woman had once been the frightened traveler he had rescued in the desert. They still talked about that night sometimes, lying in bed with the house quiet around them. Graham would pull Hannah close and whisper that hearing her voice cry out for help had been the best moment of his life, because it had led him to her. Hannah would laugh and kiss him and say that despite the terror of that night, she would not change a single moment because every step of her journey had brought her to him. In 1903, Sarah returned from San Francisco with a husband, a professor of literature who fit surprisingly well into the Arizona landscape despite his Eastern manners. They settled in Prescott, where Sarah's husband took a position at a new academy that had opened. Sarah and Hannah remained close, visiting back and forth regularly, and their children grew up as cousins who saw each other often. James Foster, who had married his sweetheart in Prescott, also remained a constant presence in their lives. He and his wife had 2 daughters, and the Foster and Quincy families spent holidays together, building an extended family network that supported and sustained them all. Thomas fell in love at 18 with a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, a sensible girl named Catherine who could ride and rope as well as any man. Graham and Hannah gave their blessing, and the young couple married in 1900. Thomas brought his bride to live on the Quincy ranch, and together they worked the land alongside Graham. When Martha passed away peacefully in 1905, having lived long enough to see her great-grandchildren born, the main house went to Thomas and Catherine. Graham and Hannah built a smaller house on the property, comfortable and cozy, perfect for the two of them and William, who was still at home. Margaret surprised them all by falling in love with a lawyer from Phoenix, a young man of good character who respected her intelligence and independence. They married when she was 21, and she moved to Phoenix but visited often. She never became a teacher, instead using her education to help her husband with his practice, essentially becoming a legal assistant before such positions were common for women. William proved to be the adventurous one, talking about seeing the world beyond Arizona, about traveling to places he had only read about in books. Graham understood that wanderlust, even as it worried him to think of his youngest son going far from home. But he and Hannah had raised their children to think for themselves, to pursue their dreams, and they would support William whatever he chose. As Graham and Hannah entered their 40s, and then their 50s, they grew even closer if that was possible. They had weathered joy and sorrow together, success and struggle, and through it all, their love had only deepened. They knew each other's thoughts almost before they were spoken, could communicate with a glance across a room, and still found joy in the simple act of being together. On a warm evening in May of 1910, Graham and Hannah sat on the porch of their small house, watching the sun set over the mountains. It was a view they had seen thousands of times, but it never grew old. Thomas and Catherine's children were playing in the yard, their laughter floating on the evening air. William, now 18, was preparing to leave for college back east, the first Quincy to pursue formal education beyond basic schooling. 25 years, Hannah said softly, her hand finding Graham's. Can you believe it has been 25 years since that night? Graham squeezed her fingers gently, bringing them to his lips. Best night of my life, he said. Hearing you call out, riding into that camp, seeing you standing there so brave even though you were terrified. That was the night everything changed. You saved me, Hannah said. No, Graham replied. We saved each other. I was just going through the motions before I met you, Hannah, doing what was expected, following the path laid out, but you made me want more, want to be more. You brought color and joy and purpose to my life. And you gave me a home, Hannah said. Not just this place, though I love it, but a home in your heart. You gave me a family, a purpose, a life richer than I ever imagined possible. They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, as the sky blazed with color and faded to purple. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of their family, the legacy they had built together. Thomas and Catherine were good stewards of the ranch, ensuring it would thrive for another generation. Margaret was happy in Phoenix, using her intelligence and education to make a difference. William was poised to go out into the world and make his own mark. Do you have any regrets? Graham asked, though he thought he knew the answer. Not one, Hannah said firmly. Oh, there are things I might have done differently if I had known better, decisions I might have changed. But regrets? No. Every choice, every step led me here, to this moment with you. How could I regret any of that? Graham pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder, fitting against him as perfectly as she had that first time he had held her, the night he proposed on the hill overlooking Prescott. I love you, Hannah Quincy, he said. I have loved you since that night in the desert, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Graham, she replied, forever and always. The sun finished its descent, and stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Inside the house, a lamp was lit, casting warm light through the windows. One of the grandchildren called out, and Catherine's voice answered, calm and patient. Life continued its eternal rhythm, the daily motions that made up a life well lived. Graham and Hannah remained on the porch, watching the night deepen, content in the knowledge that they had built something lasting. Their love story had started with a scream in the dark and a cowboy who rode to help, but it had grown into something beautiful and enduring, a partnership that had weathered every storm and celebrated every joy. They had raised children who were good people, who would carry on the values they had tried to instill. They had built a ranch that would provide for generations to come. They had created a family knit together by love and loyalty. And through it all, they had each other, the foundation on which everything else was built. As the years continued to pass, Graham and Hannah grew old together, gracefully. They became the matriarch and patriarch of the family, the ones everyone turned to for advice and wisdom. They saw their grandchildren grow and have children of their own. They watched the world change around them, technology advancing, the frontier closing, Arizona moving toward statehood. But through all the changes, some things remained constant. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management, adapting to new methods while honoring the old ways. The family gathered for holidays and celebrations, the house filling with laughter and love. And Graham and Hannah continued to love each other with the same devotion and tenderness they had shown from the beginning. When Graham was 72 and Hannah was 69, they took a trip back to the place where they had first met, that stretch of desert between Jerome Junction and Prescott. The landscape had changed some, with more settlements and better roads, but the essential character of the land remained. They made camp near where Hannah's had been that fateful night, and as they sat by the fire, they talked about how different their lives might have been if Graham had not heard her cry for help. "I think we would have found each other somehow," Hannah said. "Call it fate or destiny or God's plan, but I believe we were meant to be together." "I like to think you are right," Graham said, pulling her close. "I cannot imagine any version of my life that does not include you." They stayed up late that night, watching the stars wheel overhead and remembering the young people they had been. The fear and uncertainty of that first meeting seemed distant now, tempered by decades of shared life. But the love that had sparked between them then still burned bright, a flame that time had only strengthened. Graham passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1918, at the age of 74. He died in the house he and Hannah had built, surrounded by his family, his hand clasped in hers. His last words were for her, a whispered "I love you" that she would treasure for the rest of her days. Hannah mourned him deeply, feeling his absence in every moment, but she did not despair. She had had 54 years with the love of her life, a marriage richer than most people could dream of, and she was grateful for every moment. She lived on at the ranch for another 9 years, cared for by her children and grandchildren, still teaching occasionally at the school in Jerome Junction, still finding joy in books and conversation and watching her family grow. When Hannah Foster Quincy passed away in 1927, at the age of 78, she was laid to rest beside Graham on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. 3 generations of Quincy's gathered to say goodbye, along with friends and former students and people whose lives she had touched over the decades. The story of how Graham and Hannah met became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The night Graham heard a frightened voice and rode through to drive off the men threatening her camp became the foundation of a love story that inspired everyone who heard it. Their descendants would continue to work the ranch for generations, building on the legacy Graham and Hannah had started, always remembering the love that had been the bedrock of the family. In the end, Graham and Hannah's story was one of courage and chance, of a moment when one person chose to help another and found his entire future changed. It was a story of love that grew from respect and admiration into something deep and lasting. It was a story of partnership and family, of building a life together through hard work and determination. And it was a story with a happy ending, 2 lives intertwined so completely that they became one, a love that endured through every challenge and remained strong until the very end.